Hi, everyone. Hello. My name is Allie Place. I'm so excited to be here today. I just want to start by thanking everyone for allowing me to be a part of this wonderful event. Thank you to Whitney for organizing this. Thank you to everyone who's figuratively or literally backstage here making things happen. What an incredible event this has been so far. So I I want to start with a just a brief note of solidarity for all of you. If you are having a hard time, if you're here because you're in need of connection and you're in need of community, I think we all are in need of things like that right now. If you are a person with kids right now, if you are a person who is in school right now, um, things are not easy, and I just want to express a message of solidarity with you. Things are not easy all over the place, and if you're here and you've shown up, and you're showing up every day, that's amazing. So I just want to recognize that we're all in need of some connection and some support. So I support you. So I'm going to start with making sure that my there we go. So my pronouns are she, her. I think it's an important thing to start with, and I want to recognize anyone's pronouns. I don't know if I can see the chat, if you're able to chat with me, but if you do, and you put a message there, I welcome you to include your pronouns if that's important to you too. I'm going to share just a little bit about myself to start. I am originally from Ohio. I grew up in Cincinnati, and I went to school there. And for the past few years, I've been living in Fayetteville, Arkansas, which is where I'm broadcasting to you from now. I teach at the University of Arkansas. I teach graphic design there in the School of Art. And okay, so I can't see the chat. I don't think I can get into hop in right now. Well, maybe someone backstage will help me see important messages in the chat if I miss them. So I live in Arkansas. I've lived here for a few years. It's teaching at the university is it's a wonderful place, and I love my students. I teach design. I teach usually speculative design and emerging technologies and experience design. And I love to tinker with things that are kind of techy, but kind of weird, but kind of speculative, but kind of against the status quo, which is a lot of what I'm going to talk to you about today. I've always had an interest in feminism. And when I went to graduate school in 2014, I started to wonder about how different generations interact with feminism. And so I conducted some research studies around millennials, and who were at the time the youngest voting generation, which is not the case anymore, but understanding how millennials interact with feminism in a way that's different than other generations that have preceded them, and why, and how that relates to design and the way that we incorporate those values into the way that we design for communities and with communities. So this talk is part theory, part manifesto. So thank you for indulging me while I share some thoughts with you, which leads me to my first hot take of several hot takes, which is that designers should all be feminists. And you may have heard a TED Talk or a book that had the title, We Should All Be Feminists. And this is kind of in the same vein. This is a call to action for designers to understand why we should all be feminists. You're either probably thinking one of two things, either, yeah, duh, we should, or why? What does one have to do with the other? A lot, actually. We're experiencing a massive reckoning as a society in the past few years. There is Me Too and Christine Blasey Ford and Breonna Taylor, and all these events and injustices have suddenly become more visible and made visible the centuries of injustice that have preceded them. They're forcing us to confront the inequitable, unjust structures that shape our day-to-day lives, structures that significantly benefit some people, like straight, white, hetero, wealthy men, and deeply harm others, pretty much everybody else. So you've probably noticed a similar reckoning is happening within the discipline of design if you're a designer. We are asking serious existential questions. How are we complicit in perpetuating systems of oppression? How are we causing harm? How can we be more inclusive? So to me, the better question might be, why are we not talking about feminism in design more? Feminism is defined in many different ways. According to the dictionary, it's the theory of political, economic, and social equality of the sexes, can also refer to organized activity. But the way that we define feminism has a lot more to do with how we embody it. And we don't all have to define it the same way, because we are all going to embody it differently. One of my favorite things about feminism is that as soon as you mention the word, no matter what you're talking about, someone has a contradictory opinion to share. And that's especially true if they themselves are also a feminist. To me, feminism is not just about women's rights, it's about power, who has it and who doesn't. But there's always someone who's going to disagree. And I think that's one of the positive things about feminism, is that we can have constructive conversations about different ideas without having to decide that one of them is right and one of them is wrong. So feminist theory provides a framework for analyzing the inequitable power structures that we see in society, and not just as they relate to gender, but all facets of identity. And as a discipline, I think we have a lot to learn from feminist theory. Historically, feminism has primarily been visible as an activist agenda, responsible for movements like Women's Lib in the 60s and 70s, all the way up to Me Too in the 2010s. And pictured here, the Women's March in 2017. But feminist theory underpins all of the activism that takes place around feminism. It's also a lens. As soon as you look at any project or initiative or problem through a feminist lens, you instantly see something that you wouldn't have otherwise, because it forces us to ask critical questions that would otherwise be seen as irrelevant. Like, how does this message land with a non-native English speaker? Or how does the design of this building impact nursing mothers? So as soon as we start asking those questions, we're revealing all of the ways that we've previously erased those experiences, or sidelined them, or to use a tech kind of UX term, we refer to them as edge cases. Anyone who's marginalized is sent to the edge of the project. They're not a central focus. They're not important. So we treat them as edge cases, and that's what their experience then becomes. So I'd like to share a few ways that I believe that feminist theory can be applied to design. The first is very simply that feminists subvert the status quo. The bedrock of feminist theory is a wholesale rejection of the status quo. As designers, it's in our job description to reject the status quo. We create interventions to move people from a less desirable state to a more desirable state. But you could argue that design today is the status quo. Apps and algorithms and advertising all being exploited by tech companies and corporations to capture our attention and monetize our participation. Designing a sleeker interface or building even a new app to do something different can no longer be considered an intervention, it's complicity. Design has long been complicit in replicating systems of oppression. The most visible one is capitalism. Design as a discipline has traditionally positioned itself as a tool that is in service to capitalism. Therefore, it's also a tool that is in service to the exploitation of labor. Our entire culture is centered around capitalist values of overwork, self-sacrifice, productivity. At Facebook, they call this move fast and break things. And I think we can say now we know that they definitely did. We must be careful not to conflate rejecting the status quo with innovation, as they would at a place like Facebook. Innovation is not a human word, it's a money word. The concept of innovation is directly incompatible with the centering and the healing of marginalized communities. When innovation is prized as the only thing that matters, that's when we risk the erasure and the re-traumatization of vulnerable people. If innovation has ever served human beings in a capitalistic society, it is in spite of, not because of, its commitment to profits and return on investment. Next, feminists think intersectionally. Intersectional feminism is based on the concept of intersectionality, coined by law professor Kimberly Crenshaw. It's a word that we've been hearing a lot more of lately. You've probably seen it all over Instagram, depending on who you follow on Instagram. But sometimes I think it's used as a shortcut for simply just acknowledging that race exists, which brings me to hot take number 2. You can't be a feminist without being anti-racist. And I should say first that feminism has not historically been anti-racist, to say the least. It would actually be far more accurate to say that feminism has almost always been deeply racist, and still to this day is in many ways. But as I mentioned earlier, that's not my feminism, feminism TM, trademark. To me, it's pointless to say that you care about the rights of women if you don't explicitly focus on the rights of Black, brown, Indigenous people of color, women of color. Same goes for poor women, disabled women, queer women, trans women, neurodiverse women, immigrant women. All of these different facets of identity are incredibly important in how they shape someone's experience of the world, how they meet the world. So this is the foundational theory of intersectionality, that the marginalization someone experiences as a result of their gender is also colored by other facets of their identity, like race and class and ability. And when we talk about intersectionality, we're not just talking about identity, we're talking about power. Who has it and who doesn't? Who is dominantly situated because of their identity? Who is non-dominantly situated because of their identity? And when we design for a person or a group who is non-dominantly situated, we have to address their relationship to power. I was at a conference last year in Chicago, and the speaker was talking about his work in the Chicago inner city. He was someone whose work I admire, and his talk was wonderful. And he does work around empowering youth and preventing gun violence in Chicago. And he talked about intersectionality in his talk, and what he essentially said was, I don't think intersectionality helps us. I don't think it's good for us to break down. I think it pulls us apart. It breaks down all of our differences. It focuses on our differences. I don't think that's productive. I think we need to focus on what makes us, human, what makes us similar, what makes us, a community. And I have to say, I couldn't disagree more, despite respecting this person and all of his work. When, excuse me, glossing over the intersections of our identities is a form of erasure. And it's a mindset that serves the oppressor, not the oppressed. Designing something for all women is not likely to benefit all women. It would likely overlook the experiences of many marginalized women, thus perpetuating their oppression. So intersectionality is a framework that can be applied in the same way that we apply design frameworks to the work that we do. Students here, shown in this photo, in my class, they're conducting an exercise that I call intersectional stakeholder mapping. And they're not always so sure about this exercise because they're used to utilizing design methods that take something that's wildly complex and just dwindle it down into something very, very simple that they can play with. An intersectional stakeholder mapping doesn't really do that. It kind of does the opposite. It's a tool for analyzing an audience that would reveal your assumptions and missing demographics in the way that you're looking at a problem. So just like my students, we all tend to shy away from this type of thinking because it is really messy. Identity is a subject that is really messy. Designers don't like things that are messy. We like neat and tidy solutions because it makes us feel like we solved something, like we had an impact. Which brings me to my third hot take. The revolution will not be toolkits. We have to re-envision what success looks like for us as designers. We can't take on a massive societal problem like racism or sexism and solve it with a toolkit. We have to re-envision, what it means to succeed at addressing problems. As technology weaves itself ever deeper into our lives and problems get even messier, we cannot hope to just solve a problem and walk away from it. Success will be measured by more than just artifacts created and return on investment. It will be measured by relationships and communities and long-term human impact. So my next aspect of feminist theory is that they embrace complexity and plurality. This is one of my favorite things about feminist theory. It's possible for two ideas that are opposite to be true at once. It's possible for two differing perspectives to be valid at once. Feminism directly rejects the idea of positivist truth, which asserts that all knowledge is knowable and attainable. We just have to go out and do the research and get it and find it. And that's a very male-centered, egocentric way of framing knowledge and framing experiences. Feminist theories about knowledge reject this notion, asserting that knowledge is only knowable by a person who embodies the experience of that knowledge. Just as there are a plurality of definitions about feminism, there's a plurality of experiences of oppression, and feminists do not shy away from complexity, and neither should designers. We're not just designing posters and websites anymore, we're designing cross-platform campaigns that shape behavior, apps that are deeply integrated into people's personal and professional lives, algorithms that color the way that we see the entire world, technology that is ubiquitous and inescapable. And we're dealing with messier problems in society, and we need methods and frameworks that take that into account. Design thinking is not sufficient to address the deeply intertwined systemic issues in our world. We cannot design thinking our way out of racist algorithms and biased technology. In fact, that's part of what got us here in the first place. So when we're looking at how we solve problems, there's just no one way that works. I love this quote from a feminist theorist in the 70s. It will take us shoving at the thing from all sides to take it down. Our work should yield a plurality of solutions, and they should be open-ended. They should be responsive to the context at hand. There's no simple solution. There's no single solution. It's going to take a myriad of attempts and ideas and failures, not to mention a great deal of resilience, to affect the change that we want to see. And we must support not only a plurality of interventions, but also a plurality of perspectives and ways of seeing the world. We have to get comfortable with complexity. We have to temper our white savior complex that causes us to swoop into a community as the hero problem solver and then leave, having done our work. We must step aside and let communities lead. Next, feminists are systems thinkers. Feminists are not focused on just individual rights. They look at the systemic causes of problems. And we need more critical systems thinking in design. We tend to talk about the problems that we're seeing due to a system that is broken. The criminal justice system, the healthcare system, the voting system. The systems are not broken. They are working exactly as they were designed. There's a saying among systems designers that I love, which is even the most oppressive or the worst system in the entire world is perfectly designed to achieve the results that it is getting. So I look to Experts like Antoinette Carroll in St. Louis, who runs Creative Reaction Lab, Antoinette asserts that, like all systems of oppression, inequality, and inequity are by design. Therefore, they can be redesigned. If we start to look at systems as artifacts of design, we can start to see the structures of power that are in place, whose values shape the design process, whose interests are centered, whose identities are exploited. Everything we do as designers is part of a system, and every choice we make either reinforces or dismantles that system. Even when we think we're helping, we're sometimes also part of the problem. We design apps to help women cope with mental and emotional burnout without addressing the afflictions of capitalism and hustle culture. We design software to make the confusing process of filing your taxes a little bit easier without questioning the inequitable design of our tax code. It's true that we're trying to make people's lives better, we're trying to help, but designing apps and tools that provide a hack or a workaround for the inequitable power structures in our society actually directly contributes to allowing those structures to remain in place or propping up the status quo. So our solutions need to place the burden of change on institutions and those with power, and not on those who are marginalized. This is critical. When someone is oppressed in our society, we tell them to just, adapt to this, use this to fix it, deal with that. We're only oppressing them even further. Structural change has to happen, and it's our job to facilitate that. Okay, feminists think radically and act incrementally. In feminist theory, feminists are framed as builders of relationships, of coalitions, of movements, of worlds even. They are radical in their imagining of an entirely new world that does not oppress and exploit women. But they also know that that's not going to happen easily. They celebrate the success of even tiny incremental changes that are achieved day to day, year after year, but they continually fight for the radically different world that they aim to build. Designers should too. It's not enough to just chip away at a problem with an app here or community service there. We also need to think bigger. We need to think radically, and we need to allow radical speculation to frame our design process and our methods. If we're going to design a future that is feminist, we have to design for tomorrow's problems, not just today's. At this point, we're just playing catch up right now, trying to come up with ways to address what's happening today in this moment. While technology and the economy and the environment change so rapidly, our solutions are outdated by the time we actually get to implement them. We have to speculate and anticipate where we are going and design for future problems. It is possible to honor present reality while also designing for the future. And when we're grappling with such massive and complex issues, it's important that we look to the future and speculate about a better world. But we must also keep our feet on the ground and honor the lived experiences of marginalized people right now. Which brings me to my last point. Feminists are allies. We must familiarize ourselves with what it means to be an ally. And to me, that means to speak out, but do not speak for other people. So we use our power and our privilege and our abilities as designers to speak out for what is wrong, to speak out against injustices that we see. But we do not speak for the people who are marginalized. We do not erase or sideline their narratives. We center them, we elevate them, we make them an integral part of our process. So for design, that means we design with, we do not design for. We must integrate marginalized folks at every step of our process. We must hold each other accountable for the impact of the work that we do. We must hold institutions accountable. And we must call in those with power and privilege to do the work. And we must never stop listening and learning from others. This work is hard, but it has to be relational. We have to depend on each other to keep moving forward, to keep doing the work, to support other people doing the work too. So that's my manifesto. Thank you for joining me. My contact information is on the screen, and I think Whitney's going to join me here to chat for a little bit.
Me. Sorry, I muted myself. And rookie mistake. Allie, thanks for joining us in Memphis to talk about this. I think your research is really captivating and really important for us to consider especially in the time that we're in. And the time we're in is still evolving. So I don't even know the time we're in.
The time we're in that will never end.
Right. Like I watched the debates last night. So we're in like another piece of the time, right? So one of the things that you mentioned was I'm going to say a quote you said, "We cannot think ourselves out of racism." Oh my gosh. Like, can that be a t-shirt? You should just put that on a t-shirt. Because what we saw as soon as things really started picking up was toolkits coming from everywhere. From like, I mean, I got off Instagram for about a week or so just because I was tired of seeing toolkits. So if we're not using those toolkits, if those toolkits aren't the singular solution, or can you talk more about that? Because there were so many released. Is it just the implementation of those toolkits that people are messing up, or is it the toolkit in and of itself being a document that folks are just handing without understanding the work that has to go into it?
I think it's all of those things. I mean, no shade to people who design toolkits, because you know that their heart's in the right place and they're doing the work. And I don't mean to disparage them. Anyone who's putting forth effort really deserves some amount of recognition. But I do think we have to be more cognizant of, how we're going about things. This isn't just about impact; it's about intention, and it's about the way that our process informs outcomes. So if we're distilling something very complex, such as systemic and institutionalized racism, down to here's a toolkit for addressing your implicit bias, it gives people the wrong impression about how deeply complex those issues are. So right away, we're lying to people about what these problems are about, because we're demonstrating to them that they're not, that they're pretty simple if you really think about it.
Right.
So maybe a toolkit can still be effective, but it must be it must be a part of a plurality of solutions that involve other things like relational work and, centering the work of people who are doing more than toolkits, activists and thought leaders addressing racism. And I think that's where the knowledge and the expertise comes in for us to understand how to interact with the systems that we interact with and engage with the institutions that we engage with in order to make a difference. So that's where we can have an impact by, using our expertise and using our position to interject ourselves into systems and dismantle them from the inside.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's really true. People asked a lot about when you create an art and design week for a city, like, why didn't we just only look at large museum institutions, or why didn't we just go to some of the bigger nonprofit clusters and say, hey, we just want to tag you guys and say, come be a part of this week. But it was really important for us to build this with the community. And you mentioned that in your talk of let the communities lead. So we had put out those proposals. We said, no, ditch theme, right? Because theme is us forcing what we want to do on what the city is going to celebrate. Whereas the proposals coming in, a lot that we've seen throughout the week, was what people wanted to talk about, and then also what the community needed. So I think the let communities lead part is a huge piece of, no matter where you're working, whether it's for-profit or nonprofit, like remembering that. And I think people forget that. They just go tell the communities what they should have. And I don't think that's necessarily what we want. So what I'm going to ask you as our final question is, you made the statement of about who you're listening to and learning from. So who are you listening to that we could tune into? We brought you here, so you're our connect of who we're listening to. Now, who are you listening to that we should follow or learn from that's putting work out there?
For designers specifically?
Yeah.
The things that I've been reading and rereading lately that are the most impactful for me, I'll give you one, is a book called Design Justice by Sasha Kostanda-Chak. It's a amazing book about community-led design and the ways that design interacts with systems of oppression. It's not framed by feminism, but it has mentions of feminism, but it's a very much it's very complementary and very it's surrounding the ideas that I've talked about today. And another, oh gosh, I've really made an effort to change who I follow on Instagram lately. And not to say that, I've been following people like, like Rachel Cargill and Antoinette Carroll for years and learning so much from them about, their experiences as activists in their communities. But I've not been doing that in the design world until this year, thanks to, the power of social media to elevate previously unheard voices. So I'm following a lot of organizations that specifically focus on Black designers. I'm following a lot of accounts that are specifically devoted to decolonizing design education. Yeah. And, it's little bits here and there. It's various voices. It's various people. But I think that's what's great about it. It's not one singular person who's leading something or, taking charge of something. It's so many voices coming to the table.
Yeah.
And that's always, that's my favorite thing about, these ideas is that we're not just bringing people to the table. We want to give them the microphone, let them have it. So I think that's what, I've been trying to do with my social media feed is, brown up your feed. So that's how I've been interacting with a lot of, differences in changing the way that I see the design world specifically.
Yeah. No, I think that's really great points. I wrote down both of those books because I think it's a different perspective. You're right. Design, the conversation around design, social justice, and social equity. We saw the museums and other institutions like that talking about it, but design for me, it was something that, you're right, I started changing who I followed. I was following everybody at first. I'm not following everybody anymore. 6 months into COVID and police violence ensued, people's reactions. But you mentioned one of the books was about decolonizing design education. You are a professor. And so you are working with students from pretty much they're 18 coming straight out of high school. It's the first time they're able to do things like vote on their own. They're able to they're living on their own sometimes because they've moved away from their family. Can you talk a little bit about how you interact with those students? Like what is it? If I'm a teacher, how do I even start the decolonizing design conversation?
Yeah. Well, first, I don't want to conflate decolonization with other means of activism and, changing things, because decolonization is very specifically related to identifying the colonized values and ideas in our education system, which we try to do through our curriculum, rejecting the Western canon in our history class and things like that. But beyond just decolonization, I think it is such a hard time to be in college. I mean, COVID aside, it is such a challenging time to be in college. The financial struggles, the mental health struggles. They have, they're working 2 jobs and they're in, a sorority on the side. Like there's so much going on. The pressures on them are insane. So my ability to simply regard my students as humans and not just students is right away changes our dynamic together, right away changes our relationship together. I treat my classroom as a space of reduced hierarchy, and I look to them to lead. I look to them for knowledge. I look to them for, things that they know, because the things that they are learning are shaped by what they already know. And if we're not empowering them in the things that they already know, then they're not going to learn from us. So I think, kindness and compassion go a really long way as a professor,
Yeah.
a really, really long way. And just treating the classroom as a space of, something that is designed just like any other system. So revealing the capitalist values that shape our education and our institutions, revealing the underlying racism and sexism in design and design processes, just things like that. So we don't have these conversations as like a special, like today we're going to talk about racism kind of day. It's weaved into like just the day-to-day interactions of my classes, where we just point out, oh, that's what that is. You see it? That's what that is.
I think that's important, because a lot of times folks do think that the only way you can do it, right? It's kind of like, we're going to talk later in the conference, and we've talked earlier during the week about that exact thing, right? Like, how do you bring in this conversation around diversity, racism, homophobia, transphobia, all across the board? If you're an institution and you think one time period of DEI training is the work, right? That you are sadly mistaken. If we have funders that think the work is just funding DEI workshops one time, that is not accurate, right? It is how we weave it into our everyday life. It's how that institution, how you as a professor have woven it into every piece of what you're doing. So I love this. Allie, if people want to keep up with you and your brilliance, what do we need to do?
Oh, to keep up with me?
Yeah. Twitter, Instagram, Medium.
I do put some writing on my website, and through Medium sometimes. You can follow me on Twitter. I haven't used it a ton lately. I've been a little busy. But I do use Instagram. But I will say that, the work that I'm doing is starting to become part of a book project. And so that's where I'm putting a lot of my focus right now. So I will soon start publicizing some information about that. And that will certainly involve an Instagram account. So,
that's awesome.
So you can look for that.
We will. And let us know when the book comes out or you're getting ready to. We'd love to have you in Memphis to talk about it. We've got a great local bookstores, or however we need to sell those books, because I know we're going to have some readers. Allie, thank you so much for joining us in from Fayetteville and talking about how designers should all be feminists, because they just really should be.
Thank you.